So I come from a background of like World of Warcraft, right? So I played WoW exclusively for like 14 years until I want to say the end of 2018-ish. So that was like BFA. I just finished the first raid tier, and it started to become, I don't know if anyone plays World of Warcraft, but like it was, for me at least, became a chore. So like I had to like do my world quest, my artifact power grinding, and like Azerite power grinding, and I didn't have the energy for it anymore. So I switched to Final Fantasy XIV, but I still had Raider brain. So I skipped. No one judged me. I skipped. I went straight to raiding. Didn't do any sort of other content because it didn't appeal to me. I didn't realize there was other content outside of raiding because that's all that was like drilled into me from World of Warcraft.
Yeah, I see that in the comments with it, like M plus and raiding. It's like that is the heartbeat of the game. Go ahead.
That was it. That was literally it. I would log on, make sure you do your Mythic Plus for the week, make sure you've done your World Quest, you finish the raid tier, next Wednesday, log back in, rinse to repeat. And then I started playing Final Fantasy XIV, and I had the same kind of motto, right? It was just get to endgame. Admittedly, there's even less to do, like in terms of preparation here. You cap your tomes weekly, and then that's it. You're on the same wavelength as everyone else. So I did that, and I was just like, okay. And then end of last year, like my community were just like, have you like tried the story? Have you like gone into it? And in the process of like going back from the beginning and learning like from scratch essentially, because I did boost what happened, I found out like there's way more to do in this game. So like I unlocked things like House of the Dead, Zodiac weapons. It makes me cry. I don't know if anyone did Zodiac weapon when it was current. I did it like 4 expansions later, and it made me cry. So I don't know how anyone else did that. So like those Heaven on High, PvP, like the gold source is an event in itself, and just like all the multitude of leveling jobs just gave me so much to do. So like Zadnor, like, things like that, I didn't even register until very recently. So like that's something I stepped into 2 months ago. Yeah, a month ago, 1.5 months ago, I started doing that.
What do you think about it, like overall with the Zadnor and Boja? Because you said you didn't get into Eureka, so this is kind of your really introduction into the system where we've kind of evolved with it. So I'm curious, what's your takeaway?
Well, this is it, right? Because especially, well, now we're in a very kind of like an interesting kind of moment in time, right? Where loads of World of Warcraft players are coming over. And so like trying to explain to someone from World of Warcraft what Boja and Eureka is, it's confusing because even I can't wrap my head around it. I'm like, it's like an entire world away from our world. Like it has its own leveling system, it has its own like ranking system, it has its own ways of like progressing through the zones. And so like for me, it's like a content that, so I like thrive with PvE. Like I think last podcast Moody was on, right? And I think Chris was saying how you thrived off of like playing with people. And like that's content that I love to do. Like I love playing with people, I love PvE. So like having an area where I can go into and still play with people, but like essentially also kind of be on my own is like what I loved about that. So like
that
Eureka, for example,
flexibility.
now, Eureka now, I usually just go in, ask someone for a map timer, and I'm in there for like 3-4 hours. So like I love it.
I would say that the WoW, if you're having trouble telling people what the WoW equivalent of Eureka and Zadnor is, first of all, Shadowlands, like the Maw and Torghast, is kind of like a deep dungeon tied to it.
Yeah.
There are examples across World of Warcraft. In Wrath of the Lich King, we had PvP raids. And so this idea that you have raids that don't work like normal raids, things like Archivon and all that, they were weird, right? And so that's how you got your Black War Mammoth, and you did those, and you could only do them when you controlled Winter Grasp. And so there was weird behavior around them, and they functioned differently. But also like Argus and the Maw and like these zones, we have had isolated zones where like your mounts don't fly. The island that you'd go knock out in Legion was a little bit weird. And so like there are these ideas. My understanding is Korthia, because like obviously with everything going on, this has been what's allowed me to step away again, because it's really easy to have a sick taste in your mouth when you log into a Blizzard game right now. And so, but like Korthia, my understanding is where people are like, oh, I hate that it's just standing around waiting for a monster to pop. And it's like, oh, so you do know what Zadnor is. Like you know exactly what Zadnor is. And so it is, you're standing around, you're waiting for a boss to pop. It's not nearly as much so as Eureka was. They've tuned a lot of that back, and there's that alternative progression you're talking about, going and doing like the 60 raids or whatever. And so it's cool that they've made kind of 2 paths. But like there are WoW equivalents, they're just kind of strewn across WoW. And so as somebody that played, I do think it's interesting that you made it as far as you did. So I found WoW to be a chore and quit for the first time in Pandaria when they lifted the daily cap, in addition to having raids, in addition to having pet battles, in addition to having like, and so like they just added a ton of stuff and then released the caps and said like, you can do it all in 1 week. And I was like, okay, I will. And then I was like, oh, I'm really tired. And so it's amazing to me that you played that and you were like, yeah, keep going.
Never.
And then you went to Warlords of Draenor and you're like, I love garrisons and only one real content cycle. And then you're like, oh, Legion, legendaries for days. I love that there are terrible drop rates once you've gotten too many bad legendaries. And you were still like, no, we are good to go.
So, like,
World of Warcraft.
I think a lot of it is to do with like fear, right? So like I think a lot of people stay in games as long as they do is the fear of being new in a game. Like that's what kept me in World of Warcraft for as long as it did, is because I was in the closed beta for Final Fantasy XIV 2.0 when it came out, right? And so I like logged in and I was like, okay, having fun. But I was in that moment of, I didn't know what anything meant. Like people were talking about like getting to cap and doing poetics, and they were just like, oh, and then you trade these poetics in for these items, and then you can trade, because let's be honest, the currency system in Final Fantasy XIV is the most convoluted thing in the
He speaks the truth. Oh my goodness.
And so people, I was like looking at
got currency
like,
for days.
They're like red scripts, and then you can get these white scripts where you talk to this vendor and then you transfer them to this item. I just went, I know what this is.
WoW has one token vendor and it just has everything on it. I got a token. What's the guy got? And you go to one store, and 14's like, yeah, but how are you going to have menus within menus? And don't you want to have to like walk back and forth across a room? And if you get it wrong, you just lost a week's worth of progress. Like, isn't that better?
What was it? And like that was, especially when you're on your own, right, is you don't really know who to go to because you don't have your friendship circle there. And so as much as like those things pained me, like everything you listed like brought back like memories of just like fear. The only thing I liked about MOP was like my little farm that I had. I could go to every like 2 days to get my like, you know, recipe crafting ingredients for like cooking.
Yeah, they put Farmville in game.
Yeah, they did. That was a thing too, wasn't it? It was a whole like fiasco. But yeah, like a lot of that was just fear of starting a new game. Like I listened to people doing like content and they talk about like, oh, like, you know, the whole, was it the expansion release? Something about Raw Barn Extreme and there being like that being a thing. And they're talking about like they're doing the coils when it first came out. Like I have that FOMO because I stayed in the game as long as I did because I didn't want to be the new person in another game. I think eventually like that was the camel that broke the like, the straw that broke the camel's back when my guild were just like, have you done your like, world quest to unlock your, you know, the power on your shoulders? And I said, I don't want to be forced into doing content I don't like, so I can do the content that I want to do. So like being told that I need to do my Azerite power grinding and my mythic pluses, which I enjoyed, but being told you have to do it in order to be able to do this or be competitive at this, which is like, I guess my point of view is I play games and like to like min max and be good, but I don't want to have to do that in a different like avenue. And that's kind of like what I just went, yeah, no, I'm done.
So it's an interesting thing that you bring up, especially as it relates to FOMO, because my theory is that FOMO works until it doesn't. And essentially what happens, and I've experienced this, and this is just a personal take, but I experienced to where, that FOMO, it's like you don't realize it. You know, okay, yeah, this is exciting. Oh, I want to log in. I'm having fun. This is a good experience. But then all of a sudden, at some point, and like it's different for everybody, there becomes a time where that becomes a stressor. And for me, like a couple of games that have had that kind of FOMO, I would say Majora's Mask is the first one that I actively just did not enjoy playing. And so I found myself with plenty of time. You know, this is when I was like in school, I got homework, I got sports, I got family, but I got no responsibilities. I literally can spend all weekend just playing a video game and no one's going to care. But like, I just was like, and so nowadays, like FOMO actually actively keeps me from trying it. Where in 14's case, like I'm invested, right? I have a community here. This is where me and my friends get together and we get together regularly. This is where we get to sit down and talk about like the game and theorycraft and have all this excitement. That in and of itself, I think like if there is FOMO that creeps in, it is, I think, better managed. But something like the case of Destiny 2 is a real classic example for me where that's, even though I know I could finish the season if I just played it like a little bit here and there, just the fact that I have experienced times where I just can't play right now. It's just better for me not to even engage in that system. It's like you get to a point where it works and then all of a sudden there becomes this hard no. And then that only builds a frustration or could build frustration or resentment. And my theory with WoW is very topical to what we're about to talk about. My theory.
Oh my god. Okay.
I do want to say thanks to WG Productions and Keelan for helping support the podcast by hitting that join button over on Ginger Gaming Radio. All right, that's the plug I forgot to get in. Yes, I'm a professional. So the but what my theory is that obviously like dopamine is a huge factor, and I think that essentially with how dailies and how all the structure has become is it's rooted in FOMO, and it gets you that dopamine, but it trains the brain to need more of it. And ultimately, even if it's the same stuff that normally would have had that normal like satisfaction, your body wants more. Like you're like, this isn't doing it for me. Like I need more caffeine in my individual day. And that's just my like, you know, non-educated how dopamine works on the human brain theory. But I was just like, from what I've read and who I've talked to, I was like, I wonder if there's this also aspect out. Obviously, outside of all the stuff that happened, you know, over the last month, like that in and of itself, like we could have been having this conversation the same way because people are still leaving WoW prior to that happening. But then essentially this happened. It kind of was, you know, the camel that, you know, the camel that broke the straw's back in this case. Yeah. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Anybody?
So I know you're really excited about the upcoming Halo game because they're promising to do a Destiny style model, but the seasons don't expire. So if you buy a season and you're halfway through it and then life gets busy, you can come back and finish it at another time. It's effectively a DLC of sorts, and you're kind of buying these reward tracks from Guild Wars. You're buying these kind of passes at something. In Final Fantasy, we have relics, right?
Yeah.
So I know with the Garo, you went and took that as an excuse to go do content that you don't normally do that much of, and you did a lot of it. You did enough PvP to get all 3 Garo mounts. So that's kind of a hard contrast with kind of what you're describing. But then if the relics were not only from that expansion no longer relevant item level wise, but also were glamours you could only obtain during that expansion, and after the expansion the relic systems were deleted, no more Bozja, no more Zadnor, would you engage in the relic system?
Absolutely not. Now you take me no kids, and most likely yes, hard no. Does that make sense? Where it's like it works until it does not work. So all of a sudden, when you start taking away that content, for example, I mean, this is like sticking with the Destiny theme here because this is a very real example. Destiny 2 decided that they were going to remove a ton of content, zones, pieces of content, raids, etc. And I was like, and I had plenty of time. This was a summer. No one was pregnant at the time, so I had plenty of bandwidth. So I went and engaged in those systems.
That's rare.
It's rare. It was like a 2 month.
Your wife last night was expressing frustration with some families at your kid's school that had 6 kids.
Yeah,
those crazy people with 6 kids
and
families. I was crying, laughing so hard. And I was like, yeah. What insane people! Everybody knows 5 is the line.
5 is the line, man. 5, ride that line, ride that thunder. Anyway, thanks Vern so much for joining the podcast legends. I appreciate your support. But so Destiny took it out, and I decided to jump in and do that content, and then they removed it, and I was happy that I did it. But if they did it again, the answer is straight up absolutely not. In fact, that's one of the big driving factors of one of the things that I've only done in that game is PvP. So taking that to Final Fantasy XIV, hands down, yes, you'd get me around. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, that's going away. They did it with the PvP stuff. Oh my gosh, that's going away. They do it again, and chances are I'm not even going to start it. Does that make sense? What do you think, D?
See, for me, it depends, because if it's something that I have an active interest in, so like you mentioned, you went and farmed PvP mounts despite having 0 interest in PvP previously, like that would not bother me in the slightest. Like I have an obsession with like shiny weapons.
Yeah.
So all of my glamours and stuff revolve around like a shiny object, and 9 times out of 10, the easiest item is like the weapon, right? And so the Zodiac and the Heaven's Ward weapons look super nice. The Shadowbringers one looks debatable. But I like that they have those there. And so if I knew, for example, in Endwalker that they were going to make those relic weapons only available in Endwalker, and then once you moved on, like no one would have access to them anymore, I'm a very proud person. Like I would have loved to been like, yeah, like that would be for me the opposite. For you, you're just like, no, that will demotivate me. For me, you would do the opposite. Like I would want to get all of those because it means that the person who comes in afterwards like it's almost kind of like an achievement that I did. Like I managed to get all of these things while it was current, while it was there. No one can get it anymore. Like it's like a prestige thing almost. So for me, no, I think in certain respects, like I can appreciate how FOMO can be like a turnoff, especially when it's like an overwhelming kind of comeback to a game. But for me, FOMO in those instances, when things kind of get vaulted and put away and no one has access to it anymore, it makes me want to do it. It's like the opposite.
There is a drive to that. Like I do know, because I can only speak for my situation. You take my kids, you put them in college, you have nobody that is physically, like I not have to worry about your daily survival. Like, okay, yeah, like, oh, this is going to happen. And I have this much time. As long as I've got the time to do that, like it burns less. But as just in this case, a working parent adult who loves to game, like I have to look at kind of where my time is best spent. And so like to the relics and all that, what did I do last expansion? I didn't engage in Eureka. I leveled my jobs. I went because I said that carries forward in a better way for me as a gamer. This isn't like everybody has to do this. Like this isn't saying follow the Brian plan, but I had to look at where's the better investment, and leveling the jobs and having the crafters and everything all done is more that horizontal progression, more that investment progression. So yes, I could have had a Eureka weapon. The regret is I haven't done Baldician Arsenal. The regret is that that's something that is on my bucket list, but it's also not deleted. And that's the real thing that Final Fantasy XIV does real well.